Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Would you please take a moment to click the like button? We're very insecure people, and we desperately live off the number of thumbs ups we get. And then, if you haven't, please subscribe to our channel. Subscription is totally free. And uh, and then, if you would please, if you so desire, click the bell icon to get reminded of when we drop a new episode.
So, this is my last episode with Todd after that. So, it's been really nice. No, I'm just kidding. If any of you are new to this channel, each week Todd and I take a moment to talk about the upcoming lectionary reading from the Gospels for the upcoming weekend. And our goal is to talk about those passages in the context of love and inclusion and societal justice. We're hoping that our conversation will be just talking, as in justice, but then also something we might say during this time would inspire you, along with us, to do more in our justice work than just talking. So, Todd, what are we looking at this week?
Well, first of all, I really didn't sell the reason why you should click the bell icon. The reason you need to click the
Oh,
bell
here we
icon
go. Round two.
is because, like me, I know that you are desperately looking for another notification to pop up on your phone. And by clicking that bell icon, that'll happen. Yes, another reason to look at your phone. There you go. All right, sold that. All right, this week we are in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41.
Yeah. So, this is one of the sea crossings in the Gospel of Mark. And those of you familiar with the Gospel of Mark, how it's narratively structured, I know this will be a review for you. But something we need to keep in mind this week is the way that Mark wrote his gospel is that you'll have stories that are very similar repeated. It's almost like he's telling the same story twice with just a few little minor detail changes. One example is the feeding of the multitudes, where you have 5,000 in one and 4,000 in another, and the stories are a little different, and they're a few chapters apart. And you treat those two stories the way that the narrative structure works in Mark is that you would treat those two stories like bookends or covers on a book, a front cover and a back cover. And what you look for is the stories in between those two bookends. And you're looking for the common thread and the themes and what can you get from taking these stories together, not just individually. And then once you have that, see how they relate to those two bookends. And you get this overall theme, overall lesson, overall picture of what's trying to be communicated. Well, what we're looking at this week is another one of those kinds of bookends, but it's the first one. It's bookend number one. And this is Mark chapter 4. And Mark chapter 6 is the second bookend. We're going to get to that in a few weeks. But Jesus is crossing the seas again. And that time he's going to actually walk on the water. And there's this whole inter exchange with Peter and all that. But here in Mark, this first one, Mark, this is just bookend number one. So we're going to go over it. Todd and I are going to talk about it, but you really can't extract any deep, grand theological lesson just from this first bookend. It's meant to be taken not just with the second bookend, but all of the stories that are going to come in between and looking for those common themes, which we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks.
So I want to be clear what I heard you just said is there's really nothing to get out of this passage until we read more. And my Bible says that all, every word
Okay.
uh, is useful
Well,
for instruction, teaching, correction, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. So you're saying that at least these six verses have nothing to offer. These six verses from the Word of God have
I
nothing to
reject your
offer.
premise of all or nothing. I'm not saying there's nothing in them. There's a little bit here that we can glean, but really to get the full weight of them, again, I do think you have to take them with the second one and everything that comes in between the two. But there is something, Todd. There is something here that we can glean from just this first one by itself,
Huh?
standalone.
Well,
It's
you're
not a standalone episode. You're going to have to watch the sequels.
okay. As long as the sequels are good. Sequels may not be very good.
Can't
So,
promise.
okay.
You'll just have to tune in next week and see.
Oh, that's good.
Hit the notification button so you don't miss it.
See, there you go. That's what we're
Trying
talking
to help you
about right
sell it.
there. Way to wrap that all together. So it's like you bookended it. Um, yeah. So yeah, this has been one of those stories that we've heard our whole life. It's one of the Jesus miracle stories, and he's riding in the boat. He falls asleep, and the disciples get scared, and they wake him up, and he says, "Peace, be still," and the storm stop, and he asks them why they're afraid, and yeah, so the disciples are blown away and say, "Who is this that can do all this?"
Yeah, and I think that's the real theme of this first pass. This is kind of like and I said this earlier, but it's like the volleyball setup for it to be spiked.
Mm-hmm.
They're setting up the shot by saying, here's this story, and then ending this story with, who is this? This
Mm-hmm.
person that can do these things. Who is this? And that's kind of like the setting up for the shot to be taken.
Yeah, that's good. I played volleyball. That makes perfect sense to me. So yeah, I think that's a good point, and that goes with what you're saying. Because yeah, this is like it asks the question. So now we're going to find out in the
In the
passages to come.
following, yes.
Yeah,
In the
yeah.
stories that follow this. So
Mm-hmm.
and there is a little bit of an answer here, just kind of subtly. So the author of the Gospel of Mark was writing to both a Hebrew Jewish audience and a Greco-Roman audience,
Mm-hmm.
people from both worlds. And for the Hebrew Jewish audience, there's a lot of connections in this week's story to Psalms 107, verses 29 through 30, where it says that Yahweh stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. They were glad when it grew calm. He guided them to their desired haven. And repeatedly in this Psalms, it says they cried out to Yahweh in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. In verse 6, verse 13, verse 19, verse 28, repeatedly, little different versions. Sometimes he delivers them from their distress. Sometimes he saves them from their distress. Sometimes it says he brought them out of their distress. But the common phrase is they cried out to Yahweh in their trouble. And then it ends with him, Yahweh stills the storm and hushes the waves of the sea. So that's a direct connection to our story this week, where the winds and the waves, they rise up, they surge, they cry out to Jesus in their distress, and Jesus comes up and in Psalms 107 fashion, he stills the storm and hushes the waves. And so for the Hebrew Jewish audience, there's this connection to this passage where the question is, who is this that can do this? Well, it would have been whispering back to these passages like the Psalm, this one who can deliver us from our distress,
Mm-hmm.
the liberator, the deliverer.
And so, and then when you look at the Greco-Roman audience, then you seems to also hearken to, you know, some of the higher deities,
That's right. That's right.
their ability to control weather and control the cosmos and things like that.
Where a Hebrew Jewish audience would have read this story and immediately thought of Psalm 107 and Yahweh as a deliverer from distress. A Greek and Roman world, people from that world would have read this story with no knowledge of the Hebrew scriptures. They would have thought of people like Zeus or Poseidon, or Homer's Odyssey, where stories like this happen, um, or even like Apollonius, who was a contemporary miracle worker who lived at the same time of Jesus. They would have taken from Mark's gospel and seen that Jesus is not just an average human. Jesus is to be put into this category
Mm-hmm.
with these other stories
Mm-hmm.
that we know from our culture. So, either way, the author of the Gospel of Mark is holding Jesus in high regard and calling whichever audience it is that's encountering this gospel to view Jesus. And I don't think they're doing this in a there's nothing malicious here. This is the way that culture worked. Who is this? How are we to define who this man is that this story is about? Well, here are the kinds of things he did. Do you know of other things that parallel this, either in your Jewish culture or your
Right.
Greek and Roman culture? This is the character of how we are to define. This is how we're to characterize um this person. Who is this? Well, he's
Mm-hmm.
like this, he's in this category.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's, you and I have touched on this narrative device in other conversations over the time we've been together about how um, writers of that time to not not to insert factual stories that were missing, uh, or let me say this again. They weren't inserting these stories to necessarily add more facts about Jesus, but they would use these stories, or they would use other stories that sounded very similar to the birth narratives of Caesar,
They would
or
copy the themes.
they would copy the themes, not because they were adding factual evidence, but they wanted to communicate that 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 Jesus should be looked at in this context, either as somebody who 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 we recognize divinity showing through, or in some cases he's the he's the enemy of the existing political state, and so in order to give him the respect that he deserves, he gets his own birth mythology and other characteristics assigned to him that sound like what were assigned to other rulers, either Roman rulers of the time, or connected him with Jewish history, the Hebrew prophetic or king tradition. Again, just in order to kind of like build out his resume.
That's right. And most scholars would agree that Luke is probably the latest, the last of the synoptic gospels to be written, leaving John out of the discussion for a moment. Just out of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, Luke would be the last one. And by the time we get to Luke being written, what you're describing is what Luke is all about. Luke, from beginning to end, takes whatever the claim is made about Rome or Caesar or Roman culture or the Roman Empire and repeatedly takes those same themes and retells them, where now Jesus is the savior of the world, not Rome. Jesus is Lord, not Caesar. Jesus saves, not Caesar. There's the peace of the gospel, not the Pax Romana. There's the gospel of Jesus rather than the gospel of Rome. So there's all of these parallels where they're just saying, hey, put Jesus in this category on this level to compete with these other. This is not just an average. And I think what that came out of was they had encountered such ethics and values in Jesus's teachings that had genuinely transformed their lives,
Right.
that they're trying to now, and to put it in vernacular today, but I don't mean in a used car salesman way, but they're trying to sell Jesus now to a world around them that won't listen to him long enough to encounter
Yeah.
those ethics, values, and teachings unless they see him as something special like these other characters in their already present stories in their culture.
Where these type of miraculous stories actually cause a scientific worldview today to question the credibility of the Jesus story. In that time, those were enhancing the
Mm-hmm.
credibility of the Jesus story because people were willing to, in their worldview, their understanding of how the universe worked, miracles and things like that, and God's running the universe. That was accepted wisdom of the time. So this it's so important to understand what they're trying to do with this. And then the other thing I was going to mention is the difference, from my perspective, with Mark's elevation of Jesus and John's elevation of Jesus, is John's elevation of Jesus to a God level is to get people to believe in, to get them to put faith in a being that will save them and deliver them from the material world. Whereas what I
Mark is
believe what we'll
doing is
see with Mark
very
in the
different.
weeks to come and with Matthew and Luke is you are going to, this is to solidify who Jesus is so that you pay attention to what he's doing in the next chapters, which will show that he's very much focused on changing the material world in the here and now. And so it is to
To get you to follow
validate
this
a
Jesus.
different message.
Right, right. To get you to follow him, not believe in him, not worship him,
Right.
but to get you to follow his teachings.
Right.
That's what that's a great point, Todd, to show the difference between the way that John, the gospel like John's, lifts up Jesus and the way Mark lives up Jesus. One is so you'll be a believer, the other is so you'll be a follower.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And one is very much, this is how he changes this world. And John's is very much how he gets us out of this world. So yeah, there are definitely differences. But again,
Yeah.
Mark is the first attempt that we have in our canon.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that Mark is the earliest gospel ever written by any means, by any means. But Mark is the earliest gospel that we have in our sacred canon.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the first swipe at it. You know what I mean? This is an earlier attempt.
Right.
And you can see this principle played over and over and over again. So
Yeah.
also, I think there though is a metaphor in this week's story too. At least there's a metaphorical meaning that I think we can glean from it for us today. Even though again, it's just a bookend, we're not to make too much out of it yet. It's just setting us up. There's still a metaphor here of here are these disciples, they're following Jesus, they're part of the Jesus community. They're doing what Jesus commanded. They're on their way over to this Gentile region to do whatever they're going to do over there. Um, and all of a sudden they encounter these winds and waves pushing back on them. And I thought about how today, and even in the original, maybe Markan community for the early Jesus followers, anytime we engage in trying to make our world more safe for everyone, a more just place for everyone, a more compassionate place for everyone, there are going to be those who push back against our efforts, specifically those who benefit from the world having an unjust shape,
Mm-hmm.
from systems of injustice, those who benefit from systems of injustice. We're going to create, by our calling out for change, some winds and waves. We're going to rock the boat, so to speak, not to push the narrative too far, but we're going to, there's going to be pushback.
Mm-hmm.
And so this story is whispering to us that this one that we're following can still the waves, can hush the waves and still the seas. That when we encounter pushback and waves and seas and the winds blow from our calls for change, our justice work, we have to remember who it is we're following in this. We're still
Mm-hmm.
following the teachings of Jesus, the same Jesus who's in this story. And just like the disciples, we're not alone in this. We're not the only ones in the boat. We have a community that surrounds us in our work for change as well. And maybe it's time to lean into that community when we're experiencing the pushback of winds and waves
Mm-hmm.
against justice.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a metaphor here that can be encouraging.
Yeah, and I think, and the idea of when he asks them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The idea that when those storms start and they don't immediately quiet down, but they keep going for a while, that you hold on in faith and say, we're going to find a way. Let's hold together. Let's batten down the hatches and ride this thing, and we'll find a way to get through it until somehow, some way, things start calming down. But we'll find a way through. So hold on
Just keep
and
holding
believe
on.
that what we're doing matters, that what it's right, and it's in the spirit and the power of what Jesus was doing. And so we'll keep working at it.
I think of, Todd, my own story when we at Renewed Heart Ministries, over a decade ago now, became an affirming, celebratory ministry in relationship to the LGBTQ community. Um, Talk about winds and waves as pushback. The Renewed Heart Ministries boat almost went under. There were some pretty big waves and
Yeah.
pretty big supporters that walked away from us at that time. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate those of our supporters who stuck with us, who
Yeah.
chose to just maybe white knuckle it when they were insecure or afraid or had anxiety. We were white knuckling it too back then as we saw a lot of our supporters walking away. Um, but I'm so thankful for those who stuck with us, and we're still rebuilding today back to where we used to be before that. But what a journey! And there were moments, I'm not going to lie, where we wondered whether Renewed Heart Ministries were going to make it. And I think about this story: did the disciples wonder, "Are we going to make it that night?
Right.
Or is this it? Is this the
Yeah.
end?" And so stories like this can be affirmative when you're going through experiences like that. That, number one, you're in the right story. You're not the first one to go through this. Other people
Right.
have been through this before.
Right.
Just hang in there. It may be all right. It may not be. Just hang in there. Just give it a little bit more time. And I'm just, again, so thankful that we didn't just close up our doors and give up, that we just kept hanging on,
Mm-hmm.
and that things did eventually get better.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to lie, there were rough patches there. The wind, some of those winds and some of those waves were pretty big,
Yeah.
but there's always pushback. But
Yeah.
again, stories like this are encouraging in moments like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's and the other thing that happens along those ways is in the midst of those storms, sometimes what you see is you don't necessarily see the winds and the storm calming down, but you see, again, now this is totally moving past
Take the
the
metaphor to a whole new level, Todd.
yeah. Oh, okay, sure. It's divine inspiration. Um, it's but you see the people for I'm just go with me that you pull a few people in the boat uh because you stayed out there and you kept rowing and you kept fighting the wind to keep moving and you find some people along the way who need your assistance and you find out, oh, and then you also might bump into some other sailors on the ocean that are actually heading the same direction as you are,
Yeah.
and you find and maybe you lash your boats together and hold on together and ride and try to ride it out. And so I mean you can use this seafaring analogy in a lot of ways, but I think it's true. I think you say, let's you're choosing. And I had a colleague of mine who spent some time in modern day Israel and went on the Sea of Galilee and just basically talked about how when you go out into that sea, um, storms come up so fast without warning, literally, that you don't know it's coming. And so when you go out on that sea, you are automatically saying, I am there's a good possibility that I'm going into a storm, and you go
These were
anyway.
some of these were seasoned fishermen.
Yeah, and they were still out there.
They're
So
still freaking out.
it's you choose to go into the very real possibility of the storm. You kind of you even and those who are involved in justice work, it doesn't take long for you to figure out you do this work, you're going to hit storms, and so this parable teaching of Jesus through this event is it is so encouraging and needed
Yeah.
for those of us fighting it.
I think of my daughter too. There was a time when her eighth grade, was it eighth grade? No, it was fifth grade. Her fifth grade year, she was involved with a small protest that she had organized in her elementary school over
Wow.
something she felt was unjust about the system
Mm-hmm.
at that little age, that precious little age of fifth grade. And she's so sensitive that there was some negative pushback from some of the teachers. And I sat down and walked her through the negative pushback that Dr. King got, that Gandhi got, that others have experienced. You know, whenever you try to make change, whenever you try to create a difference, there's going to be some waves and some rockiness and some turmoil. And she had to be reminded that, you know, that this is part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this story speaks to me. I think of my own experiences when I've stepped out. This story continues to remind me that when we do experience the pushback, the negative pushback for doing something right, when we see the winds and the waves, number one, we're in the right story.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, we're not the first persons to go through this.
Right.
And number three, we're not alone.
Right.
We're not alone. This is par for the course.
Yeah.
And that doesn't lessen in any degree the white knuckle moments.
Right.
Those are still quite legitimate. There can be
Right.
some fear. And I imagine in this story, you know, there's some fear communicated there
Yep.
when they're crying. What did they say? What did they cry out?
Do you
Oh
not
yeah,
care that we are
teacher, don't
dying?
you care if we drown? You know, how many of us have been there though? You know what I mean? Jesus, don't you care if I drown? You know, here I am doing this. Anyway. Yeah, so again, it's just a bookend in the narrative sense. There's so much more to glean. This is just, you know, setting us up for it. We need to look at the next few stories and the bookend at the end and connect them all. But I think there's still a lot to glean from
Yeah.
just this by itself.
All right. Anything else?
That's what I got.
Okay. Well, before you tell people about what's happening with RHM Ministries, I do want to point out that if you go to Herb's website, you can there's a video available that not many people pay attention to, but there's one there about Herb teaches you the basics of volleyball, and you can
Not true.
you can
You will
learn the
spend
basics of
hours on our
dig,
website
set, and
looking for that
spike.
video.
So check that out and build up your net game with. Okay,
Anybody that knows me in real life knows how short I am. Yeah, I play volleyball.
I'm apologize. I have there's something wrong with me tonight. Forgive me. I'll I'll be back normal next week.
Todd's had a
Hey,
headache
well,
for the last few sessions. Tonight he's headache free, so now he's in rare form.
that's true. So we'll see what happens. What do you want to tell us, Herb?
Yeah, let me just encourage you. If you're new to the channel, check us out at renewedheartministries.com. Tons of free resources there, tons of materials there about helping us find the intersection of our faith and social justice work from a progressive perspective. And if I want to say a thank you out there too to all of our supporters who ensure that Renewed Heart Ministries can continue being a voice for change. If you would like to join them in supporting Renewed Heart Ministries work, you can do so by going to renewedheartministries.com and clicking the donate tab at the top. And other than that, just check us out at Renewed Heart Ministries and take advantage of what we've put there on the site.
All right. Well, we wish all of you all a great next 7 days and hope for your best. And we will look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thanks for watching, everyone.